Good morning. My project addresses how the lack of development in the frontal lobe truly impairs a juvenile's ability to understand the weight of their actions and make decisions relating to delinquent behaviors. The frontal lobe of the human brain is known as the last section of the brain to develop, usually within a person's mid-20s. With that, it has been repeatedly hypothesized and known for its relation to decision-making and higher executive functions. This has brought about discussion among scholars in how the juvenile justice system in the United States transfers juvenile delinquents into adult or criminal court. However, there are gaps that exist in the research that has been produced, not fully stating the significance this lack of development has on juvenile delinquents. Reaching into the types of waivers that can transfer a juvenile into adult court, there are 6 that exist in the process. They all differ from state to state. However, the main 3 are judicial waivers, prosecutorial waivers, and statutory exclusion. All provide different contexts for these transfers. Judicial waivers require a trial that takes into account the previous crimes, psychological fitness, and nature of the crime that the individual is committing. Prosecutorial waivers lie in the hands of the prosecutor, provided specific evidence, and is also a form of an automatic waiver. Statutory exclusion is also an automatic waiver and is based on the type of crime. For example, first-degree murder. An individual that commits that crime is immediately taken into criminal court, as this removes the crime from the juvenile court jurisdiction. Essentially, these two go hand in hand to better address how the juvenile system is laid out. Further research must be done to fill the gaps that currently exist in line to tying the two topics together. So to go more into it, the methods that exist in research of the frontal lobe and limitations within that existing research sets up the information and background to lead into how specific practices with juvenile delinquents might need more assessment. So just to kind of go further into it, further types of research on the frontal lobe have been used to show kind of how there is a difference between a juvenile's understanding of decision-making and risky behaviors versus an adult's. And in those previous research, they've done things like having participants complete tasks such as the game of dice task or the modified card sorting tests. And with that, they've also done surveys and self-reports in studying brain development. One of the main ones is structural or functional imaging of the brain in order to directly look at the frontal lobe and how it's being used. Of course, though, with that, there are limitations in the research that does already exist, such as what I mentioned before with there being a lack of tying the two kind of topics together, juvenile justice and frontal lobe maturation. So kind of stating the direct relation between the two to address the use of these waivers. And again, with the use of these waivers, they don't really take into account the true developmental lack of development within the juvenile's brain. They do take into account with the judicial waiver a little bit with the fitness trial that will allow the juvenile to be assessed on psychological maturation, but it's very subjective and the judicial waiver is not used quite as often as any of the automatic waivers. With that being said, I do propose that new research should be done on this that directly puts juveniles versus adults in situations where the task is directly pertaining to laws. All in all, whatever study is done, what more research is done to connect the two should also be coupled with a functional imaging technique to see, preferably an fMRI, to see what portions of the brain are being used so that you can directly correlate that with that kind of lack of development in the frontal lobe. But all in all, While many studies are conclusive on the idea that the frontal lobe, specifically the prefrontal cortex, is a center for decision making and executive functions, this does not seem to have had any immediate draws for change within the juvenile justice system, and previous research on the ethics and types of jurisprudence that are required to fully understand the ways that juvenile courts are created and used extends only relatively into the early 2000s and warrants further evaluation to determine what types of waivers are continually used to transfer juveniles into adult proceedings. In general, more research should be done to further correlate the two subjects at hand, frontal lobe development and juvenile court transfers, and possibly push for legislative change that encourages rehabilitation of youths over immediate punishment in the adult criminal system. Thank you. Have a good rest of your day.